Welcome everyone to this week's Force Friday. Today we are going to talk about Force in comics. Last session we talked about Force in animation, and today, like I said, we're going to focus on comics. Again, some of you may not know this, but the reason I'm actually sitting here in front of you guys today is actually because of comic books. I took like 4 years of architecture and mechanical drawing in high school. And the math just started getting way too intense for me. And I was collecting a lot of comics in the mid 80s and late 80s. And it was actually The Dark Knight, to be very specific, by Frank Miller and Klaus Janson and Lynn Varley, that made me decide, you know what, I want to go into comics. Like this artwork and the story are so amazing, that it inspired me to look at that as a career. And I'm from New Jersey and New York area, and it happened to be that Marvel and DC were in New York, so it felt somewhat real. It's like, okay, these companies are in New York. I had to just find a school that would, give me a program that had comics. And I went to the School of Visual Arts in New York, which SVA. They had a cartooning and a comic book program, so that's how it all started. So I love comics, is what I'm getting at, and I'm going to share with you some of the comic book artists that inspired me during my teens and through college, and then even thereafter. So before we get into the whole thing, let's say hello to Swanli and Mrityunjay. How are you guys doing?
We're doing good, Mike. How are you?
Good. Yeah. I'm coming to you guys from Washington State today, everyone, by the way.
Awesome.
Yeah, bouncing back and forth between Cali and Washington. Yeah. So those of you that are in Washington State or near Portland, that's where I'll be coming soon. Yeah, get in touch with me if we can hang out and draw. All right, so like I said, let's talk about comics today. The three artists that are on the thumbnail here are Mike Mignola, who's on the left, and you probably, if you don't know his name, you might know him by Hellboy, right? There were also a few feature films that were done, live action films done off of his comic. In the center, we have Adam Hughes, who I do happen to know, and J. Scott Campbell, right? One of my faves. He's been around quite some time now, obviously extremely popular on Instagram, just amazing draftsman. All three of these guys are so different and so amazing in their own specific way, right? So skilled and stylized. And ironically, I can say that one of the things that ties them all together is Force, believe it or not. So the reason we're doing this series is, Swanli Mrityunjay and I often get asked, well, okay, great, you guys teach us how to draw Force. How do I use it? And we just want to show you, what, it's not like we're just teaching how to draw, that those skills translate, and they translate over to many different jobs. Like I said, we looked at animation, here's comics, right? So let's get through this. I'm probably the biggest comic book geek out of the three of us, so I'll probably be driving most of it. But feel free to ask, questions in the chat, and I'm hoping that Swanli and Mrityunjay have some questions, and hopefully I'll be able to answer the questions. So let's get started. So I'm going to start with Mignola, and we're going to talk about the three guys in the thumbnail a little bit, and then I'm going to go back in time and kind of go a little bit more chronological. There's going to be at least 50 to 100 comic book artists that I'm not going to talk about today, just because we only have an hour. Okay, but there are many, 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 many artists out there that I really admire, that use Force in their work, and you can see the fluidity and movement. I grabbed just a small handful for the hour. We'll do some draw overs and show how they're using Force. So my apologies if they didn't make it in here, because there's a ton of comic book artists that I really admire. Okay, so let's talk about Mignola. One of the things I wanted to just present to all of you guys is, Mignola did not start off as the Hellboy guy that we all know of. This is a really old Submariner piece. It's probably like, my guess would be probably mid 80s or so. I did not know of Mignola at this point yet. In fact, looking at this artwork, I don't remember ever reading a Submariner piece. Mignola came into my life with this story, which was called Cosmic Odyssey, which, as you can see, was a DC comic, and it was like a mini series. And I just really dug this guy's work. I was like, I loved the shaping of all of it. I can't remember if I was already in school or not, but I loved how clear it was and how simple it was. You know, the irony, looking back at this now, is this was Mignola's interim. You know, this is Mignola where he's going from traditional comic book artist to where he's finding himself here in Cosmic Odyssey, and then he moves over to Hellboy, right? Where all of this starts to be defined, you know, more clearly defined, and where he really jumps out with a much clearer aesthetic, a clearer voice, right? And you can see that, you know, if you start looking around here, and we'll look at Hellboy in a second again, but if you start looking around this page, let's go with white here. You can start seeing these simplicities of abstraction, right? Look at these legs, right? You can see this curve and this curved in there. This is more the straight side than that one. Same here. Like he's got simplicity in the posing, right? The straights and curves that he ends up, you know, you can see it in Batman's legs, right? Like he's learned how to like abstract the anatomy. He's somewhat angular, right? So curves are typically made out of two straights. You know, so if you have a curve, let's say a curve is like this, Mignola might not do that. He'll take the apex and say, oh, I'm going to do that out of two straight lines. He'll do this and this, right? Makes it more angular. But it represents a curved idea, right? So very aware of where the apex is and how this is all playing out, right? So he's doing this, and then I grabbed a couple of panels from Cosmic Odyssey that I remember very clearly that stuck out in my mind, like this huge guy here with his whole guts shot out, right? This giant circle, and he's still walking around. But look at the shapes, you know, again, look at the shape of Batman, right? You can see how he is very forcefully, first of all, you know, sweeping to the right, right? So you can see that, you know, it's like everything's going this way, his head's popping out here, right? And his body's going that way. So he has clear direction, right? And you can see, again, the very simple arms and legs, right? But believe it or not, they're appealing and they are actually forced shapes, right? See, he's like this. And the other guy, same thing. Look at the other guy's leg, right? This leg right here. Really excellent outside, inside, outside, right? For those of you that are on the website know what the heck I'm talking about, right? This is like outside thigh with a straight interior. He curves very seamlessly and beautifully through the contour of the inside leg, right into the knee. And he digs that straight in there, and then he pops out with the calf. Notice the shortness of it, how much foreshortening he puts into the lower leg there, right? Really, really well done. You know, very cleanly drawn, great shape design. He's got anatomy, you know, going on in here, right? You can see his style back then was he would have these lines, and I actually love doing this. He puts these little like tick marks against the line. They're little form lines, basically, right? He gives it like a just an ever so slightly softer edge, you see? So already, right, here we are, we're in Cosmic Odyssey, and we have the beginnings of Mike Mignola, right? Sorry, this one's a little blurry, but man, I love this panel. Again, it's one of my favorites. I just love, look at the big C torso of this guy, and I love that he's standing up there, and Batman is just below, you know, below him on this wall. But look at the big C torso, right? It's very simple. All right, you see, look at the legs. Everything's got this bendiness to it, but Mignola typically, especially in the Hellboy comics now, here not so much. You can see the inking has a little bit of thick to thin. The Hellboy comics usually have no thick to thin. The line is of one thickness, right? So it kind of makes it feel more, more graphic, right? It's a little bit more graphic design. But this comic actually, there is a little bit of thick to thin in the lines. You see? So I just want you to see that here's Mignola, here's a step he went through where his stuff was a little softer, not as graphic. Also that he changed, you know, he morphed, right? He evolved into the art that we love today. And that, you know, that made him really well known. It got a little bit more graphic, a little more angular, right? So anyway, that's Mignola, right? And I want you to be aware that somebody as graphic as Mignola, let's go back to our cover, right, who's doing Hellboy, still has force in it. So even when it's this graphic, right, you've got this giant straight and this curve going like this. You see what I mean? So, and its head is going this way, and this arm is going this way. There's a sense of movement in the design itself, right? So it doesn't matter how graphic or not it gets. It still has a straight to curve shape in it, okay? And hopefully this all made sense in showing you his evolution as well, you know, from more traditional comic book artist going through a phase, right? And then finally growing into the guy that we know created Hellboy. Any questions? You guys have any questions?
Does they? I must be thinking, they must be like doing like a lot of iterations on this. So, like, what's the pipeline of it? I'm always like,
Oh, for comics.
yeah,
Yeah, well, comics in general are kind of interesting, and there's sort of a generic pipeline, but at the same time, it varies. But to be really, really simple about the pipeline in comics, usually there's a script, so you have a writer,
Mhm.
and it's a handwritten, not handwritten, but a typed script. You get almost like a film script. But I've seen scripts that are not written in the format of film. Sometimes they're bulleted. Sometimes I've seen scripts that are where the actual writer, the script writer, will actually go panel by panel. They'll say, panel one, I want it to do this. Panel two, I want to see this. Panel three, I want to see this. There's other ones that are very loose and open ended. It's like Superman does this, Batman does this. They get in a fight. They say this, this, and this, and that's it. So it's a very wide range on scripts as to how tight they are and descriptive they are, and broad as to how much interpretation can be done by the artist, right? So you've basically got the script writer, then you have the penciler. So that's pretty evident. What it is what it is, right? It's the guy who does the pencils. That's the drawer, right? The drawer of the comic is the penciler. Now, after the penciler, typically you have the inker, and then you can have either the painter or colorist. Let's call him painter for now. Right? And that's it. Now in here, in digital painting, I have some friends that are professional painters in comics, and sometimes, because most of the comics nowadays are done digitally, sometimes they'll have a guy that does what's called flats. That's the guy that blocks out all the shapes that the paint job will be done in. So somebody does sort of the labor work of layering all the different main shapes underneath the inks, right? And above all of this, of course, is the publisher, who's represented by the editor, right? So the editor is overlooking all of this to make sure that the comics come together as best as possible. Now, just to be clear, this is a generic pipeline. There sometimes are people who the scriptwriter is the penciler. They're one and the same guy, and then they get an inker and a painter. Or sometimes the scriptwriter is a person, but the artist does pencil and inks. Sometimes the artist does pencil, inks, and paint, right? So these are the jobs, but who does those jobs changes from comic book to comic book. But this is sort of the generic path, right? Most comics, by the way, American comics, if you're not aware of this yet, are done on 10-inch by 15-inch paper. Nowadays you can even buy this paper where it's already pre-blue lined, if you work traditionally. If not, you work digitally. You want to put it at least up to like 300 DPI and do like a 10 by 15. Usually there's a border around this on the page. I think 10 by 15, from what I recall, is the actual like printable page. And if you buy the stuff, it'll tell you like, here's the bleed, and this is like the actual area that matters, right? So yeah, thanks. Good question. That's the generic like pipeline, right? So, when it comes to force, of course, where we would stand out is in here and in here, right? The strongest is penciling and inking. I've in fact had inkers tell me like, man, force is so awesome for inking because you got this nice, really good thick to thin. You really get used to drawing with good line, right? So yeah.
And you also have someone who adds the the text and the special effects, right?
You mean in the drawing stage or the painting?
I mean in the final stage, like someone has to go in and add the balloons with the text and.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it depends. Again, yeah, that sometimes there will be, to your point, sometimes you'll have someone over here that will do all of that'll do all the text. I've seen artists do that as well. It depends, but yes, you're right. There is somebody else here. So that's a great point, Swanley, because as a penciler, at the beginning is one of the biggest mistakes a penciler makes. It is not leaving space for the text. So you want to like rough it out in the panels as part of the composition and get an idea of where the stuff's going to land, you know, because it's there, right? And we don't want to get rid of it. So you want to get a sense of how that layout's going to work. Yeah, thanks for adding that. Okay, let's see. So that was Mike Mignola, right? Adam Hughes. Let's take a look at Adam's work. So Adam, I think he got most popular through Wonder Woman, if I'm not mistaken, is where he really took off. He was doing a bunch of covers. He's also really well known for the Black Cat, and he's excellent at drawing women, of course. And he does these really high polished, beautiful illustrations. I think most of the time he actually does try to get models, from what I recall, for the work. He pushes towards realism, right? And I think what's interesting is to be aware, if you are clear-headed enough in your vision and your sight, then you are going to get force in your work. You know, like Adam's sense of clarity is really high. And you can see, like for Tomb Raider on the right, you know, there's straight to curve in here, very simple abstract, you know. Let's try to get a color going here. You know, you got the back and you've got the rib cage, right? Straight to curve. And you'll notice the arms and everything still have force in them, right? We go from the shoulder down through the bottom of the arm. This leg comes out and goes back. This leg goes out. It goes through the knee and curves. I don't even know how much Adam's really trying to push that. I've never had really a big conversation about like, hey, have you read the force books or not? You can just see that his stuff has fluidity in it, right? Like the poses work, and it's because he's very accurate. You know, he's super real, and force is real. You know, it exists in the real model. So as long as you can stay on top of that, it's going to show up, right? So I highly recommend checking out Adam's work. I'd say he's probably been one of the best illustrators in the comic book industry. God, at least over 20 years now. Yeah, over 20 years. Let's see. So that's Adam Hughes. So this is Joseph Scott Campbell, or J. Scott Campbell, or sometimes just goes by Scott Campbell. He's best known for Danger Girl, right? So he came up with this comic book. I want to say it was the late 80s, early 90s when it came out. Again, actually excellent at drawing women, which I know for most artists is pretty difficult. He also has a great Instagram account and lots of force. And he's very good at shape design. You know, the shapes are always really appealing. It's difficult to draw, you know, attractive, whatever that means. It's always like a trap. I feel like the moment I say attractive, I'm sticking my foot in my mouth. But attractive women, right? Society-driven attractive women, whatever you want to call it. He's good at shapes. He knows what kind of face he likes to draw. You know, on these women, you'll see as you go across the women, there's a relative similarity, right? Subtle changes, but he's got his shtick down. You know, he does it in a very specific way. There's lots of fluidity, lots of rhythm, and the shapes are good. What does that mean? You know, well, if you watch any of our older videos, what it means is the shapes themselves don't parallel one another. He might hit that a little bit in the waists, you know, and you can see him trying to pull through here with this S torso from the rib cage to the hips, right? But you can see him pushing the straight to curves in the chest. He tries to straighten out the sides, good structure in the pelvis, and then these legs are excellent, right? It's outside, inside, outside thigh. He even over here went out in, out, which is very rare. Most artists are not savvy enough or like clever enough to know at this view that you would do that. It would be a generic front to back. And he kind of tried to even out the force into the lower leg, you know. Really, really well drawn. So let's see. Still hear me okay?
Your audio might be.
Can you guys hear me okay? Hold on. It wants to go to my headphones. Let's see. Turn on speakers. Turn on speakers. Okay. So, so yeah, Joseph Scott Campbell. right? Like I said, excellent drawing women. It's a very common thing to have an issue in drawing women. So I would highly recommend checking out his work. I don't know how much I know he does some comic book work now, but he does a lot of pinup stuff, you know? So check out his account, right? Okay, let's move on. So I started, the artists that we just talked about are the ones that are in the thumbnail. Now I'm going to kind of go back. Most comic book artist geeks will tell you the guy that everyone goes back to is Jack Kirby. Okay, this is an example of Jack Kirby's art. Jack Kirby is known for creating really powerful, dramatic, in-your-face comic book art. This isn't even that in your face. A lot of his stuff is like people's fists, right? Like coming right at the camera. So lots of depth, lots of space, you know, lots of drama, especially for this time period. You know, the thing to keep in mind here is with Kirby, we're looking at, I think mostly the 60s. Like Jack Kirby was the, you know, maybe a little 50s, but definitely 60s. Kirby was the main guy that worked with Stan Lee, by the way, right? And really made popular majority of the comic book superheroes that we now see in film, right? And if I remember correctly, I want to say that Kirby actually was a trained animator before he became a comic book artist. So it kind of gave him this edge of adding more drama to the, you know, the comic book characters than some of the other artists that were out there drawing at the time. It's funny to look at it. I think some areas of this have a lot of movement and some don't. But if, you know, even when you go to a gallery, one of the things I've learned over time is you don't want to just judge the art based on just what it is, but you also want to be aware of the time that it came out, right? Like Impressionism, you look at now, you're like, oh, big deal, it's Impressionism. But, you know, Impressionism was a big deal when it was invented, right? Or even abstraction and so on. And I think Kirby was a very big deal, you know, big deal, and just how much energy and force he was bringing to the poses, just how much depth he created. He had his own language with inking, talking about the different jobs. You know, you can see even here, these shapes are just like so interesting and abstract, and yet they hold together the forms, right? So he had this like unique way of doing that. He was excellent at like godlike stuff in the Marvel universe as well. You know, stuff like Thor, for instance, right? Things that were like big and chunky and heavy. He did a huge run on Captain America also. So, you know, if you are interested in comic books and you want to see who inspires everyone else that's out there, Jack Kirby is the guy. Now, there's other guys, you know, that are pretty well known from the past, but man, no one can deny that Kirby influenced the entire comic book industry with his amount of energy and in your face, pushed perspective, you know. So if we look at this, you know, just to analyze it a little quickly here, you know, you can see the energy in the leg is sweeping out this way and he's curving this way. And look at, what was his name? Bucky, I believe, right? Bucky's going like this. You can see all the force pushing up to the shoulders and how it reverses itself down the arms, right? And then up this arm. It's those arcs, right? Like notice this guy in the back. He's not that forceful. And the reason is, notice this arm is very straight this way and straight this way. Just pushing an arc in there makes a huge difference in comics. You know, and the irony is, there are a lot of comic book artists out there that are not that forceful, and I don't think it's by choice. It's because most comic book guys learn how to draw from tubes and boxes, which are not forceful, right? So if they do have it, either it's from my books or hopefully somebody else that told them, you know what, you just got to arc stuff, right? If you just get some arc in there, you're going to get more movement out of the figures, and Kirby does that. You know, there's just a lot of energy, you know. I like this arc here. You can see this big curve here. This is more straight, this arm, right? And it feels okay because it feels like it's the idea of the arm going straight down with the shield to this big smash that's happening here at the bottom. But everything else is really pushing, you know, lots of pushing, lots of arcs of force to create rhythms in the figures, you know.
Great use of surface line as well.
Yes, yes, that's a good point. Yeah, a lot of the older guys, to Swen Lee's point, sort of an older styling in comics was to use a lot of surface line, you know. And he does a great job of the blacks, and he's got some areas here with surface line and on the leg with surface line to give us some roundness. He's doing a good job with the clothes, right? And making the clothes give us in a sense, surface line and wrapping, right? So very solid form. So that's kind of that's a great bridge to the next guy talking about surface line. This is John Buscema. Some of you may not know John's work that well from comics, but you probably know his work from How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, because he was the main illustrator for that How to Draw book, and he was a pretty big artist at Marvel at the time, and they had asked him, to illustrate for the book. I think he did a lot of Conan, so he had the chance to do, people that are at least semi-clothed, and you can see a lot of anatomy, right? I personally, I think he was an amazing draftsman, like just excellent art. I'm sure I would stake my life on it that he was inspired by Frazetta. A lot of these guys were inspired by Frazetta, by the way, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in a future video. But you can see the influence of Frazetta's styling in here and movement. And I think that, what John Buscema did really well is I think he found his own voice. He found his own voice in that space. And you can see with this pose, like just so damn dramatic, right? Now let's redline this guy really quick. What I love here is how much force is going like this, right, into the shoulders, leading edge, right, LE, which is an animation term that I'm bringing into comics here, right? And you got all this energy of the guy's legs, right? You got out and out here, really mainly a big curve to a curve over here. So you've got all of this going on. You got this C torso that's pushing into the shoulder, and then you have the sweep here of this with the shield, and then finally this arc in this arm. Again, look at the power of the curves, everyone, right? So having that directional force line have a subtle curve to it, which is defined by applied force, really creates all this drama. So now that I've removed my force schematic, right, you can see this is how I see it. When I look at art like this, I'm like, oh, that's cool. Look, this guy's doing this, right? Which means I can also see when an artist is not doing that, because I'm like, everything here is disjointed. I can't find the railroad tracks. I can't find the path or the rhythm in this figure, where here it was very easy for me to flow through it. Right?
It's great to notice how loose his cleanup is. Like, one common mistake is to tighten up too much with the inks, but this is as forceful as a sketch, but yet it's super efficient, probably because he did a lot of work either in his head or in a sketch underneath.
Yeah, I would agree. It's interesting, right? It feels like a sketch. I mean, the line is line. He had to ink this stuff, and I would guarantee at this point, at this period in time, it's probably mostly brush. And look at how fluidly it's all done. It's still clean. It's not like it's sloppy, but you can tell it wasn't done with like a micron or a technical pencil. That has a different look and feel. Like J. Scott Campbell will work with usually technical pencils and microns and such, pens like that. And even though the shaping is great, it has a different flavor to it. There's a different finish on it. The thick to thin here is definitely keeping it more loose, basically. Not better or worse, just more loose. Yeah, it's a good point. And again, you can see all of the surface line here in the thigh, and over here you can see he's creating roundness into the shadows, right? And then he darkened the whole front of the shin, but notice the direction. He made it still all point down into the ground. And you got to love the darks and lights on the clothing, right? How all of that is pulling us up, right, into the body and then dropping us down. And he does this little thing here with this ripped fabric, right? It could have all stopped here, but he adds another rhythm by doing that. All right, kind of cool that we get this little reverse sweep. Remember, rhythm is when you have one curve connecting to another curve. It's basically the flip of it, right? So here we have this curve going this way, and then the shirt goes that way. So he creates a rhythm in that little moment, right? He didn't have to do that, but it adds, it adds this little zing, to the end there. So everything's in motion. The hair is in motion. The ripped clothing is in motion. Everything, and it's doing it all over the place. Like look at the hair. Right? He's got this going on the boots, right? Everything's moving around. It's really, really beautifully drawn, So that's John Buscema. You know what? I should write his name because it doesn't sound the way it's written. It's Buscema, Buscema. I've heard people pronounce it different ways. Buscema, I think it's Buscema, but I could be wrong. Okay, one of my faves, I have to say, while I was looking at Mignola, and I was also looking at like Frank Miller, and Klaus Janson and those guys. One of the other ones, one of my other favorites was Walt Simonson. So this is Walt Simonson, Simonson. He did Thor, and he did Thor through around before and after number 300, if you're interested in looking at his work. He just put out a book recently called Ragnarok. Ragnarok. I forget how to spell this. But the Thors, you know, like the Thor that we just saw Thor Ragnarok. I think a lot of those ideas came from these comics. Now, his wife, whose name, I forget her first name off the top of my head, she's a writer, or is a writer, and they would work as a team actually pretty often. So she'd do the writing, he would do the drawing. I think he did the inking as well, if I'm not mistaken. Some of my favorite work, this whole Around 300 series, just amazing. And you can see his inspiration from Jack Kirby. He was like the modern, to me, he's modern Jack Kirby. You know, like he put a little bit more modernism in it, slightly different type of line, always like in your face, great compositions. I happen to love, you know, graphic design and abstraction and shape design, and Simonson to me was unique in that he brought a lot of that in there. His use of text, you know, and words that were sounds. What is that? Onomatopoeia? Is that right? You know, they were done so well, like done really, really well, and very, very designed. You know. Anyway, Walt Simonson, like amazing. Lots of force. You know, look at the, you know, look at this arm, right? Look at the leg. We got outside, inside, outside going on again. This is front. You know, this to this is arcing. Look at the shape of the lower leg, right? It's like this big giant curve. He got his calf like this. He's got monster calves, right? And then I love these feet that come from like the 70s and 80s artists, you know, where these like blocked out angled shoes like this. You know, I still draw feet a lot like this too. This is kind of this is like my foundation for the silhouette and shape of it, is that understanding of it. And I love, you know, the shape of the lower leg, you know, moving down into the foot like that. Just beautifully done. Yeah. So if you're into this look, I would highly recommend look up Walt Simonson and look around number 300. This whole period, the years that he did it, just fantastic, like fantastic work. On a
I also like the contrast in here. Like, look at the cape and that the back character. Now he was like actually going around the form, but at the top of the cape, he's like, you know, changing the sculpting lines to like really insinuate force in it. So, and yeah, I'm like really digging the contrast in here. Look at the background. You know, that's kind of like splatter inking, but you know, it's in the front that's like very cleaned up. So
yeah.
I think it's also like adds more interest to it.
Yeah, and the hammers are done in a different way, the texture, right? Lots of different inking styles in here to bring you different textures. So a couple of quick things that I know about Simonson, I could share with you about my personal story is when I graduated from SVA, I had this portfolio and I was trying to get into Disney and I didn't get in, and I graduated school. And right after I graduated, I found out that Klaus Janson, who was the inker on The Dark Knight, which is what led me to school in the first place, all of a sudden was going to start teaching a class after I graduated. And on top of that, to add insult to injury, well, Simonson was coming into the school also, like right after I graduated, right, the following term. So I was like, God, I can't believe this. Like two of my favorite comic book artists are starting in the same year after I finished. So Klaus Janson taught on a Monday, and I believe Simonson was on Thursday from what I remember. So I went into school on a Monday and I sat in on Klaus's class, you know, and I was a fanboy, right? I mean, I loved Klaus's work. And I had my portfolio with me, my senior portfolio. And I said, look, I'm here just because, you know, I would love to sit in on your class for the year. And if you'd let me just sit in, you know, so I can learn, I just want to learn from you. And he said, you know what, I could do better than that. Every year I take on one student that I mentor. And he's like, I want to know if you're interested, right? So I was like, oh my God. Like I came in here to sit in on this class, and now all of a sudden I had this offer from Klaus for him to mentor me. So I took him up on that, of course, and he did. He mentored me from September until about May, right before the end of the school year. I would go to his place once a week, and he would get me scripts, and I would draw comics, and he would critique, and I was learning how to draw comics. So what I'm getting at here is I never got to Walt Simonson. Simonson was later that week, and I was just so happy with what happened with Klaus that I actually never ended up going to Walt's. And I always regret that. I don't know what my life would have looked like, what my art might have been if I had gone to both of those classes, but I never did it. And I'm sorry, Walt, that I never showed up because I love your work. So yeah, kind of weird. Yeah, so that's it. Yeah, you never know. You make certain decisions and you don't know where that stuff's going to take you, and I did not expect to get mentored by Klaus Janson because I showed up at class that day. That's for sure. So yeah, I was very, very, very lucky. And it was really sad to have to tell Klaus too. I got into Disney the year after, and I told him, you know what, I'm going to put the comic books aside. I got accepted into Disney Animation, and I can't pass this up right now. And then, not to go into a long story here, but I got lucky too, because after that, in the mid-90s is when comics crashed. Like even, I think Marvel was at threat of going bankrupt at that time, around 95 or so. And I was in animation and video games, so I was unaffected by all of that, It was sad to watch, but that's what happened. So this guy, probably most of you know at this point, I would imagine. This is Todd McFarlane. So Todd McFarlane, talking about like modernizing like Kirby. So you had Walt Simonson, who really, I think, is a little more Kirby-esque, and he's bigger and thicker and chunkier and blockier, kind of like Kirby is. But then you had Todd McFarlane just came out of like a rocket out of left field and just exploded when he got to Spider-Man. Like he became one of the top, the most famous top artists in like the comic book industry because he could bend Spider-Man's body in every position that it could possibly go into, like that no one else had the ability to draw. So, hats off to Todd McFarlane. I mean, talk about force, man. He just brought it to like the 10th level. It was amazing to see how far he could push it. He loved detail. I mean, he's the one who brought this whole like spaghetti thing to the spider webbing, as you can see here. This was a style thing of his, all this like extra stuff that you see in here. And he loved the inking part of it, just lots and lots of detail. And man, that became an aesthetic. He basically invented like a new look for comics that everyone else then was starting to copy. And I have to say, to Todd's credit, he was entrepreneurial too. McFarlane inspired a lot of the other comic book artists that were really big at the time to leave DC and Marvel and create Image, right? So Image, as far as my understanding is, Image probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Todd McFarlane. I think he was the one that was most frustrated and said, I want to start my own business. And then he went also on to create McFarlane Toys, right? So, I don't know if any of those, if you know about them, but amazing, right? Amazing high-end sculptures. So not only did he change the comic book industry look and feel, but he attacked the toy market and was like, why does everything have to look so dumbed down, and so oversimplified? Right. And he came in and man, he just totally changed that too, so amazing individual, I have to say, from an art standpoint and a business standpoint. I've never met Todd. I've watched some documentaries of his, and I have his biography, which is actually pretty good. So I recommend that. But like I said, I think he just knocked everyone's socks off when he came in and did Spider-Man, so definitely check out Todd McFarlane. Oh, and he did Spawn. Right. So when he went to Image, he created Spawn. Spawn was his own character, and Spawn turned into a hit comic book series. It turned into an animated series that was on HBO. They did a live action movie off of Spawn. Right. So he just had massive success, that came out of comics. Okay. How are we doing on time? We're doing okay. So this is Bruce Timm. So I was kind of torn on bringing Bruce Timm in for animation or comics. He's done both. Most of you might know Bruce Timm from the Batman animated series. He's the guy who really revitalized Warner Brothers with the superheroes, with Superman and Batman. It was done after his styling, right? and he did a ton of comic book work as well. This is an image that I show pretty often when I'm teaching in the class because, well, you can't deny the force of this. It's just like so amazing as to how much you put into this and how abstract it is, right? Like, watch this. Everyone get ready here for this little road we're going to go on. I love coming here from the foot, right? And just watch how we go up and over and around through the shoulders and then over here to the arm and then out the finger. And where does it point? Right at Batman, right? Like, what a ride, right? That is awesome fluidity and force at its best, right? What a great pose. And then look at the abstraction of all this force in Batman. And then here he goes for that straight line, which is a very Bruce Timm-esque thing. He does it a lot on the inside legs. He doesn't do the inside knee thing that I teach you guys. He just straightens that out. So to him, I think in his philosophy on art, he's like, I just want this to be super straight and just punch that line in there. And then he'll always do this double curve. He does that on the arm and he also does it on the legs, right? So on legs, he'll do like a straight inside line and he'll do a double curve. He'll go like this and then bounce out. Now, you know, I call that the bunny hop. He's skipping this over. That's his style. It's all good. But look at all the rhythm and fluidity in this. Look at the cape. Look at the cape hooking up into the body. Look at the body, how the body leads to the face over here. And the Joker is an amazing journey, just amazing journey. And what's even more challenging is then putting those two figures together to make a story happen, right? So just fantastic, right? This is an excellent, excellent job of design. You know, look at the legs, right? You got your curved to straight shape design. You got curved to straight over here on this one. So you can see here he's rhythmically moving, right? Yeah, just fun work. Personally, more than even the, you know, his contribution to animation, he's got tons of illustrations you could find on like Conan and other characters. I think they're awesome. You know, you could see, again, influence from Jack Kirby. You know, Bruce Timm definitely looked at Jack Kirby. You can see by the way he uses his blacks and his brush line and the big, bold shapes. Definitely Kirby influence, you know. So you can see, and I didn't do this on purpose, I just grabbed a bunch of artists that I like. You can see how much Kirby influence there is across all these people. Any thoughts from you guys?
And this is awesome. I mean, I would just like dig in the simplicity of it, the abstraction that we just did, like the dissection of it. And yeah, I mean, it really proves the point that like simplicity is like so powerful, you know, and like people really underestimate that thing. And this
Yeah.
is what I love to like show in the mentorship as well. It's like, yeah, I mean, mentees always like, you know, yeah, simplicity, and I just want to go in detail, but you look at this thing right here, how powerful it is and how amazing that is, right?
Yeah. Yeah, simple is, you know, we could say till we're blue in the face, but simple is harder than detailed, folks, you know. In fact, a lot of artists that use detail are hiding the faultiness that the simplicity would present, you know, because when things are simple, there's nowhere to hide. There's nowhere to go. You can do a lot of cross hatching and surface line and all that stuff, you know, shadowing, all of that, and try to hide the fact that things are broken or the form's not right or the force isn't correct or the shaping is really bad. When you go to someone like Bruce Timm, you have nowhere to go. You know, one thing I didn't bring in here, and I could have talked about last week, was Samurai Jack, right, which was a Gendy cartoon. Lots of great force shape in there. There's like no room for error, right, because it's flat shapes. You know, it's like, looks like it was done in Illustrator, right? Super flat graphic shape, so very easy to fall into traps. You know, yeah, good point. Okay, let's see. Let's head back. So that's Bruce Timm. Timm is spelled T-I-M-M, by the way, 2 M's. So this is Claire Wendling. I wish I knew Claire, I have to say personally, I don't. My history with Claire Wendling is actually through Stuart Ing. If you don't know who Stuart Ing is, Stuart owns a website called Stuart Ing Books, and Ing is just NG. Here, I'll write this down. I'll give Stuart a little plug here. So it's Stuart, A-R-T, Stuart, N-G, books.com. If you buy from him, just tell him I say hello. Who knows? Maybe I'll give you a discount. I don't know. But Stewart, he's like the artist's bookstore. And he's very good at it, and he knows what everybody wants. He's at all the comic book conventions. It's his job, you know. Like he's excellent at getting amazing artwork from around the world, not only to his website, but he has a store front. I don't know if he still has it because of COVID, but it's in Torrance, California, near Los Angeles. And I became friends actually with Stewart by going to all the Comic Cons at the beginning in the early 2000s. He actually carried a bunch of my books at the beginning until they got picked up by Focal. And he doesn't typically carry like books that are, you know, run or published by big publishers. He usually tries to get the hard to find stuff. So the reason I bring this all up is I found out about Claire Wendling through Stewart. You know, I think he had some of the sketchbooks that she had printed. There's books that are kind of a smaller format, about an inch and a half thick. I remember it being like a crazy blue-green color with like some kind of cat on the cover of it. And a couple of other books. And I was just blown away. To me, I was like, wow, this is like female Frazetta. You know, like her animal drawing especially is spectacular animal drawings. But you can see she could do it all. And I believe she's a French comic book artist, which is why I'm bringing her in here. And it was my chance to share her name with you. So her name is spelled like this. It's Claire Wendling. I'll try to remember after, you know, we're done here and before this actually goes live to put the names of all the different artists in the description for you guys. But Claire Wendling, amazing artwork. Everything is always moving and yet very organic and alive. Not only is she great at drawing people, her animals are spectacular as well. And she's great at all this sort of like fantasy stuff too, where you have lots of trees and organic things. Excellent, just excellent at it. So highly recommend Claire's work. I would say French comics in general are a good place to look. I have to say, just a lot of great stuff. Oh, you know who I didn't bring in here? I have to see if I can remember his name now. Oh, I know the name. Here, I'm going to give you guys another name that I didn't bring in that's in comics. Al Severin. A little harder to find, but God, this guy can draw really well. Al Severin. There is a book you can get, an art book that you'll probably find actually at Stewart's. In fact, I think that's where I bought it, was through Stewart. This guy's amazing. Amazing horses. He draws horses quite often. Just spectacular. So check him out. Okay, let's move on. We're getting in here towards the end. This was Humberto Ramos, I believe, right? Let me double check to make sure I'm correct, so I don't get it wrong. Yes, Humberto. So Humberto Ramos has done a lot of work for Marvel, as you can see. The two like Hispanic artists that always stick out in my mind are Humberto Ramos and Francisco Herrera. They're both amazing. Because we're focusing on comics, I didn't get the chance to bring in Francisco, but he's excellent as well. I happen to have on hand a lot of Humberto's work, so I'm bringing it in here. Look at this image on the left, right? What's kind of interesting here is it's a giant abstraction of directional and applied force, which is why I grabbed this. It's basically this and this, right? So the abstraction of directional applied is embodied in Venom and Spider-Man here, right? And I just love, you know, I personally, I love stylized art. So I love the styling of this, and it has a lot of movement. Sometimes he gets very close to pushing concaves to where it could tweak things out a little bit. You know, you got to be careful of that so it doesn't kill force. But in general, you know, I love the push style. I love the amount of force that all this stuff has. You know, lots of fluidity, right? I love this cover. Like I said, it's an abstraction of what we teach basically. And that abstraction is being presented right in the two figures, right? So really awesome, right? Awesome work. Okay, last but not least, this is a guy who I only just found because of Instagram, right? This is Jorge Jimenez. I have quite a few people that I've been introduced to through, Instagram. This is one of them. And I see his work almost every day as I'm going through the Instagram account, and I'm always just blown away as to how good he is. Not only in the drawing, but the coloring, the inking, like the whole process. I don't want to be incorrect here if he does the whole process or not. I'm not sure. But he's the penciler in the least. And, it's awesome, right? Like, look at all the force, moving up through the body this way. You can see it in the legs, right? You can see it in the arms. Again, it's those arcs, folks, right? Like, watch the arcs, right? If you could just make sure you keep that going, you're going to find a lot of energy in the poses. And I think it's hard. It's hard to come up with high impact, powerful poses with more than one character like this. And here he's got Batman's head and the other characters' heads right next to one another, in this standoff, in this fight, and have to figure it all out. And I have to say, Force is great for that because you don't have to draw much, right? So you can sit there and just say, well, I know I want these guys' faces right here. Now I can more simply just kind of rough stuff out very quickly just to see how I'm going to make it work, right? It doesn't have to take me much time, right? We can just do this and say, well, I want his hand there. I want this guy's arm up here, right? Like so. I'm going to put this guy's other arm down here and his leg is here. You don't want to get into the details because this is a big, complicated image, right? So you want to see if you could solve all the major problems with not much information, right? I don't want to put a lot of work into this. I'd be shocked if you got this down to one shot. If it was me, I would do this over and over again until I can finally find a place that works. Notice how Batman's fist is breaking out of the edge of the cape, right? So you got a black shape against against a white background here, right? So I was just looking at this as I started looking at the image here. And then you've got, on this side, you've got Batman's cape over here, right? So it's all black back here, right? All this is black. But the guy's fist is very bright because of the blue and the light, right? So you can see that this stands out. So you see the guy's faces, of course. You got Batman's ears in silhouette, right? You got his ears sticking out over here, so that's super iconic. You'll notice the big triangle, this like big triangle that's pointing down to Batman's face, the white triangle. And then these guys' fists are exposed, right? They're playing with a black to white design, high contrast, basically, to make sure the silhouettes are really clear. You see? Any questions or thoughts from you guys?
No, this guy is just amazing. I've been following him too, and he started to post some of like his process lately. Again, it's amazing to see how loose and free he draws. Like his final work's very tight, but it starts very free and draws with a lot of fluidity and great shapes as well.
Do you know if he colors too?
Most of the time he credits the colorist, so I don't think so.
Okay, but he does the inks, pencils and inks?
I think, yeah, I think he does it too. Yeah.
There's another guy, his name is Clayton, I forget the last name, who also is on my Instagram that I watch. He's also excellent at cleanup. Clayton Hayes, I want to say, Hayes. Yeah, check out Clayton Hayes for those of you that don't know him. So this is Jorge Jimenez. And then there's Clayton. I think it's Hayes. Right. There's a lot of good guys out there in the world. I didn't mention Joe Madureira, who was huge, like I think more in the 90s and late 90s. Joe Mad. He's known as Joe Mad, but it's Joe Mad, or I'm going to spell it wrong. I think it's like Herrera. He's, again, another amazing comic book artist. He's got some good force in his work. There's so many. I can honestly have done like an 8-hour talk today and just gone through all these other comic book artists I like. So I'm just trying to share with you here's a top level of artists all the way from like the 50s, 60s to current day that have force in their work. And that if you are a student who is interested in comics, we can teach you that. I know a lot about comics. I've actually done some comics, believe it or not. More than happy to teach you guys, you know, how to get to a place like these pros that we showed you today, and help you become a comic book artist. Okay. So that's it. That's everything I have today. You guys have any closing words?
Well, I think, you know, and looking at all the different artists, there seemed to be this spirit in the like history of comic book art where a lot of influence from animation and anime was brought into comics. You know, you see the guys started to get less bulky and more slender, you know, like you would see in an animated movie,
Right.
and, you know, bigger eyes and spiky hair. So that's interesting as well to see how that influenced like the traditional American style.
Yeah, I have in fact I have a comic book art folder and I have it divided into, so it's comic books and then it's animation style and comic book style. So I kind of even have them separated. I'm aware, you know, I kind of say the guys who kind of lean towards animation in their comics is one folder, and then there's like the traditional comic book guys, or they're just so far from animation. Like I happen to love Bill Sienkiewicz, so that's another guy whose artwork I've loved since the 80s, but he's not animation at all. You know, he's more of an illustrator. Feels like an American illustrator from like the sort of 70s, 80s kind of look and feel, but he doesn't fit in the animation, you know, folder at all. So yeah, great point though. Animation, I think, has had a huge impact on comics. And for me, I want to say I started recognizing that in the late 90s, early 2000s. I started seeing more and more of that. And I want to bet, if I were to take a bet on it, I would say it's because of the fall of 2D animation, which happened right around the same time, which was late 90s, early 2000s, when Disney stopped doing it and Pixar started really taking off with 3D. We started seeing more of this influence of 2D animation style in comic books. You know? Yeah. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed.
Actually, comic books that we have liked.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about comics. If you guys like this and we get a lot of likes, we can do more of it. I could, you know, I'm in the middle of a move, but I'm more than happy to dig out comics and talk about comic books and comic book artists, composition and design, storytelling, forceful comics and non-forceful comics. Either way, like what the point I really want to make with all this is we're more than happy to help you guys with all of that. And we have quite a few. I know in my sessions, I have at least 3 artists right now that are future comic book artists, you know, so they're here. So I want you guys to know we can help you. All right. All right, Swanleen Mrityunjay, thank you for coming, and we will all see you next Friday. Take care. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See you guys. Bye-bye.
See ya.